A single map can shatter our entire understanding of the past. We are about to examine 30 of them, each depicting lands and coastlines that history says were impossible for their creators to know. You will see a continent mapped centuries before its official discovery and find islands that vanish from modern charts. What secret knowledge did these cartographers possess, and what forgotten civilizations might they have consulted? By the end of this journey, you will have to decide if our textbooks are missing entire chapters. What does it mean when the evidence on parchment contradicts the story we all learned? Our journey begins with a piece of gazelle skin from the year 1513. In the hands of an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, this skin became a map that would ignite a century of fierce debate. It is a beautiful, intricate chart of the Atlantic Ocean, showing the known coasts of Europe, Africa, and the newly discovered lands of the Americas with remarkable accuracy. But it is the southern edge of the map that holds the true mystery. Stretching below South America is a long, detailed coastline that should not be there. To many researchers, this landmass bears a startling resemblance to the continent of Antarctica, specifically the Queen Maud Land region. The problem is profound. Antarctica was not officially sighted by human eyes for another 300 years in 1820. Even then, its coasts were perpetually locked in ice. The Piri Reis map, however, seems to depict this land free of its glacial prison, showing bays, mountains, and rivers as they might appear from the air. How is this possible? The admiral himself provided a clue in his extensive notes. He wrote that he compiled his map from 20 different source charts, some of which were incredibly old, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He called them the maps of the ancients. This single statement opens a door to a staggering possibility. Could Piri Reis have been copying knowledge from a lost civilization, one with the capability to map the world in a warm epoch before the ice descended? Mainstream historians offer a more conventional yet still fascinating explanation. They suggest the mysterious land is not Antarctica at all, but a speculative, mythical southern continent, or a distorted version of the Patagonian coast, pieced together from sailors' tales and educated guesses. The lines on the parchment are clear, but their meaning is anything but. This map forces a simple, unsettling question. Did a sophisticated global culture, now erased from memory, once survey our planet, leaving only fragments of their knowledge to echo through the ages? The Piri Reis map is not an answer. It is the first piece of evidence in a much larger puzzle. The controversy hinges on a single, breathtaking detail. When you overlay the southern landmass from the Piri Reis map onto a modern projection of Antarctica, the fit is eerily precise. The peninsula, the bays, the mountainous interior all correspond not to the icy surface we see today, but to the subglacial topography, the actual shape of the continent beneath miles of ice. This is the core of the mystery. How could a 16th century cartographer know the true coastline of a land buried under ice for millions of years? Proponents of the ancient civilization theory, like Professor Charles Hapgood, argued this was impossible without advanced prehistoric knowledge. They suggested the source maps used by Piri Reis were copied and recopied over millennia, originating from a seafaring culture that explored the world during a previous warm period when Antarctica's coasts were exposed. The map in this view is a ghost image from a forgotten age, yet the skeptics present a compelling counter-narrative. They point out that the map could simply be a distorted, speculative extension of the recently discovered South American coast, a common practice among cartographers of the time to fill empty spaces with imagined land. The features that seem to match Antarctica could be coincidence or the result of later alterations to the parchment. Furthermore, the map is famously fragmentary. It is only a portion of a larger world chart. What we see as Antarctica might just be the southern tip of a poorly understood South America, stretched and misshapen by the limitations of contemporary navigation. This is the essential tension. One side sees a precise, impossible coastline. The other sees artistic license and the fog of early exploration. So where does that leave us? The true power of the Piri Reis map is not in providing a definitive answer, but in forcing a profound question about the nature of history itself. If even one of these anomalous maps contains a grain of truth from a lost epoch, it means our timeline is incomplete. We are not looking at mistakes on parchment, but perhaps at echoes. And as we will see, the Piri Reis chart is far from alone. It is merely the opening act in a global collection of cartographic impossibilities. That question of echoes leads us directly to a document that for a time seemed to offer a definitive answer. In 1957, a rare book dealer unveiled a map that sent shockwaves through the historical community. It was a simple, sketchy world chart drawn on what appeared to be medieval parchment, but in the upper left corner, in the cold waters of the Atlantic, it showed a large, unfamiliar island. Its label was clear: Vinland Insula. This was the fabled Vinland, the land of wild grapes described in the Norse sagas, the part of North America explored by Leif Erikson around the year 1000. If this map was genuine, it was not just an echo, it was a smoking gun. It would be the earliest known cartographic representation of the Americas, drawn centuries before Columbus, proving beyond doubt that the Vikings had not only reached the New World but had mapped it. The discovery was a historian's dream. The parchment itself was carbon dated to around 1440, which fit the timeline perfectly. It seemed the Vinland map was the ultimate validation of the sagas, a tangible link between medieval Europe and a continent it supposedly did not know. The map was celebrated, published in National Geographic, and displayed as a priceless treasure. It provided the perfect, elegant bridge between the mystery of the Piri Reis chart and the established record. But then the detectives went to work. The first crack appeared in the ink. Medieval ink was typically iron gall, made from oak galls and iron salts. Under analysis, the ink on the Vinland map showed something unusual: tiny crystals of a compound called anatase titanium dioxide. This is a modern synthetic pigment, not available in its pure form until the 1920s. The presence of anatase suggested a forger had used 20th century materials to create a 15th century document. The case seemed closed, a brilliant, lucrative hoax. Yet, like any good mystery, the story refused to end there. Later studies argued the anatase could have come from medieval sand used to dry the ink or from natural contaminants. The debate became a scientific tug-of-war, with each new analysis yielding conflicting results. Some tests continued to support the parchment's age but condemned the ink, while others suggested the ink's composition might, against all odds, be plausible for the period. This map is no longer just a piece of evidence, it is a battlefield. It represents the high-stakes conflict between romantic discovery and rigorous proof. To accept it is to rewrite a cornerstone of history. To reject it is to dismiss an artifact that, in every other way, feels hauntingly correct. The Vinland map teaches us a crucial lesson in this search for places that shouldn't exist. Sometimes the mystery isn't about lost knowledge, but about our own desperate desire to find it. We are left staring at the faded lines of Vinland Insula, wondering if we are looking at a cunning forgery, or if we simply lack the tools to recognize a truth that is staring us in the face. The battle over the Vinland map reveals a deeper truth in our search. Sometimes the most compelling evidence is not a single, perfect artifact, but a tangled web of half-truths and whispered legends, compiled into a document that stubbornly refuses to be dismissed. This brings us to a map that is, by all accounts, a magnificent mess. Published in Venice in 1558, the Zeno map presents itself as the record of a fantastic voyage undertaken 2 centuries earlier by the brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno. It depicts a North Atlantic unrecognizable to modern eyes, filled with islands and lands with evocative names. There is Friesland, a large island south of Iceland. Further west lies Vinland, and to its south Icaria. To the casual observer, it looks like the work of a vivid imagination, a cartographic fantasy. But this map was not treated as fiction. For over 200 years, serious explorers, including the great Martin Frobisher, used it as a guide, convinced these lands were real. They sailed into the frigid Atlantic searching for Friesland, a place that simply was not there. So what are we looking at? The Zeno map is likely a fascinating historical collage, a patchwork of 3 distinct layers. The first layer is probably genuine Norse knowledge. The names and descriptions of some lands, particularly Vinland, bear a striking resemblance to places described in the Viking sagas like Markland and Vinland. It is possible the Zeno brothers or their source had access to now lost Norse accounts of the North American coast, which they interpreted and mapped. The second layer is one of mistaken identity. Friesland, for instance, is almost certainly a distorted and enlarged representation of the Faroe Islands, or perhaps a confused composite of several real islands seen through fog and storm. When early cartographers received conflicting sailor reports, they sometimes consolidated them into a single new landmass, a phantom that then took on a life of its own on parchment. The third layer, however, is likely deliberate fabrication. The map was published by a descendant, Niccolo Zeno the Younger, who may have embellished his ancestors' journals to bring glory to the family name. The inclusion of Icaria, a mythical island from Greek legend, suggests a literary flourish, not a nautical log. This is the genius and the danger of the Zeno map. It blended just enough plausible reality with myth and error to create something utterly convincing. It was a perfect storm of misunderstood geography, inherited folklore, and patriotic embellishment. Its legacy is profound because it was taken seriously for so long. It directly shaped the age of exploration, sending men on perilous quests for lands that existed only on paper. The map did not document a fake voyage, it created a real one. It stands as a testament to the power of a map to create reality, to will a place into existence through the sheer confidence of its lines. In our quest for places that shouldn't exist, we must therefore ask a new question. Are we searching for lost continents, or are we sometimes chasing the ghosts of our own misunderstandings, given solid form by the cartographer's pen? The Zeno map shows how easily error can be enshrined as fact, but what about a map that seems to predict a fact no one could possibly know? Half a century before any explorer would even glimpse the frozen shore, a French academic drew it from his desk in Paris. In 1737, the geographer Philippe Buach published a theoretical map of the southern hemisphere. It was not based on direct observation, but on a scientific hypothesis popular at the time, the idea of continental symmetry. Buach believed landmasses in the northern hemisphere must be balanced by similar masses in the south. Following this theory, he drew a vast southern continent, but he did not draw a single solid landmass. His Antarctica was split cleanly in two, separated by a narrow, frozen sea running from the Pacific sector toward the Atlantic. For over a century, this was seen as a curious footnote, the elegant guesswork of a speculative mind. Then, in the 20th century, our technology pierced the ice. Radar and seismic surveys revealed the true subglacial topography of Antarctica, and the discovery was staggering. The continent is, in fact, divided into two major landmasses. East Antarctica is a single, ancient continental shield, while West Antarctica is a fragmented archipelago of smaller landmasses. Dividing them is a deep, subglacial trench that aligns almost perfectly with Buach's hypothesized sea. The correlation is so precise it feels less like a guess and more like a blueprint. So how did he do it? The mainstream explanation points to Buach's rigorous methods. He was a meticulous scholar who collated every scrap of data available. Just a few years before his map was published, the French explorer Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier had reported sighting a distant ice-cloaked cape. Buach likely used this report, along with other accounts of icebergs and unusual ocean currents, to infer the presence of a large landmass. His division of the continent could have been a logical deduction from the theory of symmetry, positing that if there were northern landmasses separated by seas, the same pattern would hold in the south. It was a brilliant piece of scientific interpolation, a lucky strike of theoretical genius. Yet, the alternative theory whispers a more tantalizing possibility. Proponents of ancient knowledge ask, what if Buach's sources were deeper than reported voyages? What if, in the archives of the French Academy or within the dusty logs of earlier explorers, he found fragments of much older charts, maps that depicted Antarctica not as it was in his time, but as it was millennia before, when its channels were open water? In this view, Buach was not making a lucky guess. He was unknowingly tracing the faded lines of a prehistoric survey. The Buach map forces us to confront the line between inspired deduction and inherited memory. Is it more incredible that a man in Paris could correctly deduce the fundamental structure of an unseen continent, or that the truth had been waiting in plain sight all along, passed down through generations of cartographers until it found its way onto his drafting table? This map does not give us answers, it sharpens the mystery, and it prepares us for an even older, more enigmatic chart, one that claims to show the world not as it is, but as it was over 10,000 years ago. The idea of a forgotten blueprint finds its echo in a map shaped like a human heart. In 1531, the French mathematician Laurent Ferney published a world map that was as much a work of art as it was of science, drawn in a graceful cordiform or heart-shaped projection. At its very bottom, dominating the southern hemisphere, lies a vast speculative landmass labeled Terra Australis. This was not a new idea. The notion of a great southern continent, a Terra Australis incognita, was a geographical legend dating back to the ancient Greeks. They reasoned that the known lands of the north must be balanced by an equivalent mass in the south to keep the world from tipping over. For centuries, this was a theoretical necessity, a blank space on the map filled with monsters and wonders. But Ferney's version is different. He didn't just draw a generic blob. His southern continent has a distinct, jagged shape, with deep, river-like inlets cutting into its coastline and a curious, almost familiar profile. This moves the mystery from pure theory into something more tantalizing. Could Ferney, sitting in his study, have been sketching something more than philosophical balance? To understand this, we must step into the Renaissance mind. Cartography then was a fusion of emerging empirical data, ancient texts like those of Ptolemy, and logical deduction. Ferney was a brilliant scholar, synthesizing the latest reports from Portuguese and Spanish voyages that hinted at lands beyond Africa and the Indies. When sailors described strong currents or spotted unusual birds far to the south, it was taken as proof that a massive continent must be there, blocking the water and hosting the wildlife. Ferney's map is a snapshot of that moment where educated guesswork began to crystallize into a specific form. Yet when we look at that form today, a chill of recognition can set in. The western coastline of Ferney's Terra Australis, with its pronounced indentation, bears a startling, if crude, resemblance to the actual Gulf of Carpentaria in northern Australia. Even more provocative is the landmass's overall position and size, which some argue could be a distorted interpretation of Antarctica, connected to a mismapped South America. So, are we seeing coincidence or contamination by real knowledge? The most likely explanation is that Ferney's map is a brilliant synthesis of fragmented sailor reports. Whispers of the actual coast of Australia, touched by Portuguese or Javanese traders but not yet formally claimed by Europe, may have filtered back to him. His mathematical mind then took these fragments and integrated them into the expected shape of the great southern continent, creating a hybrid, a phantom land built on a foundation of truth. This makes the Laurent Ferney map a critical pivot in our story. It represents the precise point where myth starts to be overwritten by reality, where the theoretical place that shouldn't exist begins to resolve into a real one that does. It is a testament to the power of human intuition, to the ability of a great thinker to almost but not quite see around the corner of the world. His heart-shaped map asks us a subtle but profound question. When does a legend stop being a fantasy and start being a prediction waiting for its proof? That same year, another map emerged from the Ottoman world, one that doubles down on the mystery with an even more impossible detail. Created by the cartographer Haji Ahmed in 1559, his world map is a breathtaking work of art and precision. Like the Piri Reis chart, it displays the coastlines of the Americas with an accuracy that feels out of time, as if drawn with access to satellite imagery. But it is the top of the map, in the frozen reaches of the North Pacific, where logic truly falters. There, Haji Ahmed drew a thick, unmistakable strip of land firmly connecting the eastern tip of Siberia to the western coast of Alaska. Today, we know this not as land, but as the Bering Strait, a 55-mile-wide channel of open, treacherous water. So why would a 16th-century mapmaker, with no conceivable way to survey that remote, icy wilderness, draw a solid bridge between two continents? The answer lies not in the world of 1559, but in a world 18,000 years in the past. During the last great ice age, so much of the planet's water was locked up in glacial ice that global sea levels plummeted. In the north, the shallow seafloor between Siberia and Alaska was exposed, creating a vast, grassy plain over 1,000 miles wide, a land bridge known as Beringia. This was not a narrow isthmus but a continent in its own right, a frigid but habitable highway. For millennia, it allowed people, animals, and plants to migrate between Asia and the Americas. Then, as the world warmed and the glaciers melted, the seas rose again. Around 10,000 years before the present, the Bering Land Bridge was swallowed by the Pacific, vanishing beneath the waves and leaving only the separate continents we recognize today. This presents a staggering conundrum. The Bering Strait was open water for 10,000 years by the time Haji Ahmed put ink to paper. No European or Ottoman explorer of his era had navigated those waters to confirm its existence as a strait, let alone its previous state as dry land. So what was he mapping? One compelling theory points to the preservation of oral history on an unimaginable scale. The ancestors of the indigenous peoples of Siberia and Alaska crossed that land bridge. Could detailed descriptions of that ancient crossing, of a time when one could walk from one world to the other, have been passed down through hundreds of generations as legend? Could these stories have eventually traveled along trade routes, reaching the ears of scholars in Istanbul, who then interpreted them as contemporary geography? It is a breathtaking thought that a folk memory of an Ice Age landscape could survive 10 millennia and find its way onto a Renaissance map. The more conventional explanation is one of cartographic shorthand. When early mapmakers knew two landmasses were close but lacked precise navigational data, they often connected them with a speculative land bridge to avoid leaving an empty, unknown sea. It was a common convention. Perhaps a Russian or Chinese source had vaguely described the narrowness of the strait, and Haji Ahmed, following the style of his time, simply filled the gap. This turns the land bridge from a prehistoric truth into a practical guess. Yet the specificity nags at the mind. Of all the possible gaps to fill, why this one in this remote location with such a confident, bold line? The Haji Ahmed map forces us to weigh two incredible possibilities. Is it a miraculous fragment of paleogeography, a direct line to a world before history, preserved in story and etched in ink? Or is it simply a lucky error, a coincidence of drafting that accidentally mirrors a deep time truth? This map doesn't just show a place that shouldn't exist, it shows a time that shouldn't be remembered. And it suggests that our search is not only for lost lands, but for lost epochs, somehow captured in the lines of a chart. The idea of a land bridge frozen in time gives way to a map that captures the entire known world from a perspective few in the West ever saw. In the palace of a Korean king in 1402, a masterpiece of ink and silk was unveiled, known as the Gangnido, or the map of integrated lands and regions of historical countries and capitals. It is a breathtaking vision of the Earth as understood by East Asian scholars at the dawn of the 15th century. At first glance, it is a map centered on China, with Korea proudly enlarged and Japan placed respectfully to the east. But look further and the achievement becomes staggering. It depicts the entire continent of Africa with a recognizably triangular shape, complete with a southern tip that suggests an awareness of the Cape of Good Hope, a full 80 years before the Portuguese would round it. Europe is there too, sketched in a crude but identifiable form. This alone is a historical bombshell, suggesting a flow of geographic knowledge from west to east via the Silk Road that was far more robust than previously believed. Yet the true enigma lies on the map's left edge to the far west. Beyond a stylized Europe, the cartographers drew an enormous horizontal landmass separated from the known continents by a narrow ocean. What is this place? To some researchers, the shape and position are irresistibly suggestive of the Americas, drawn long before Columbus set sail. The landmass even features what could be interpreted as two large peninsulas, one in the north and one in the south, loosely mirroring North and South America. The implication is explosive that Korean or Chinese navigators, or the Arab traders whose knowledge they compiled, had crossed the Pacific or received reports of lands across the Atlantic. But history is rarely so simple. Mainstream scholarship offers a more nuanced yet equally fascinating interpretation. This Western continent is likely not a literal America, but a cartographic representation of legendary lands from Buddhist and Chinese mythology, most notably Fusang. Described in ancient texts as a distant land of giant mulberry trees far to the east of China, Fusang was a mythical placeholder for the unknown edges of the world. For the Gangnido's creators, steeped in classical texts, it made perfect sense to include this legendary realm as a vast landmass balancing the known continents in the east. The map, then, is not a secret chart of the New World, but a philosophical and cosmological diagram. It integrates hard-won empirical data from Islamic and Mongol sources with deep-rooted cultural beliefs, creating a complete picture of the world as it was understood, both physically and spiritually. It is a fusion of observation and tradition. So does the Gangnido show America, probably not in the way we hope, but its true value is even greater. It stands as a monumental testament to a global exchange of ideas centuries before the age of European exploration, a reminder that the medieval world was interconnected in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. This map challenges our Eurocentric view of discovery, not by revealing a hidden continent, but by revealing a hidden network of knowledge that spanned the entire Old World. But the Gangnido's fusion of myth and measurement was not the only way ancient knowledge shaped the world. Sometimes a single book could freeze an entire civilization's understanding of geography in time, and then unleash it 1,000 years later to change history. This is the story of the Ptolemy world map. In the 2nd century, a Greek scholar in Roman Egypt named Claudius Ptolemy compiled everything the classical world knew about geography into a monumental work called the Geographia. It was a system, a set of instructions for drawing the world using a grid of latitude and longitude. Then it vanished from the Western world. For over 1,000 years, Europe's maps shrank into symbolic diagrams, more concerned with theology than coastlines. But in the 15th century, a copy of Ptolemy's Geographia was rediscovered and translated from Arabic into Latin. It was a thunderclap. Here was the entire world, laid out with mathematical precision from the Canary Islands in the west to the Silk Road in the east. For Renaissance scholars, it was not an old book, it was the ultimate truth, a recovered blueprint from the height of ancient wisdom. Cartographers rushed to print it, and it became the absolute template for every New World map. This rediscovery did not just advance geography, it defined it. Yet that definition came with a profound and stubborn flaw. Ptolemy's map, for all its genius, contained two colossal errors that would haunt explorers for generations. First, he depicted the Indian Ocean as a giant inland sea, completely enclosed by land, with a vast southern continent connecting Africa to Asia. Second, he dramatically underestimated the size of the Earth's circumference and extended the African continent too far to the south, bending it eastward to eventually join that same southern landmass. On paper, this meant sailing around Africa to reach the Indies was impossible. The ocean was a closed lake. This was the authoritative, scientific view that explorers like Columbus were taught. He studied Ptolemy closely, and those errors directly shaped his fateful calculation. By believing the Earth was smaller and Asia stretched much farther east, he convinced himself that sailing west to Japan was a feasible journey. Ptolemy's mistakes, in a very real sense, sent Columbus across the Atlantic. But there is a quieter, more intriguing detail on the Ptolemaic world. In the blank space south of Asia, beyond the enclosed Indian Ocean, many of the rediscovered maps printed in the 15th century include a label, Terra Incognita, unknown land. This was not a new addition by Renaissance printers. It was part of the original Ptolemaic tradition, a placeholder for lands rumored but not mapped. This simple phrase captures the entire tension of the map. It was a document of stunning advancement that also boldly charted its own ignorance. It gave Europe a scientific framework to understand the world, while simultaneously drawing walls around that understanding. The map propelled the age of discovery by inspiring men to test its limits, and it hindered them by filling their minds with confident inaccuracies. The Ptolemy world map is a powerful lesson in how knowledge works. It shows that even the greatest breakthroughs can become prisons if they are worshipped rather than questioned. For over a millennium, it was the ultimate authority on places that shouldn't exist, and its greatest legacy was ultimately proving itself wrong. Ptolemy's map built walls of theory, but the next chart was drawn with the urgency of a state secret. In the year 1502, a Portuguese agent named Alberto Cantino performed one of history's greatest acts of cartographic espionage. He bribed a royal mapmaker in Lisbon, obtained the kingdom's most precious and guarded document, and smuggled it across Europe to his employer, the Duke of Ferrara in Italy. This stolen treasure is the Cantino planisphere, and it is not just a map, it is a snapshot of a world being carved up in real time. The document is breathtakingly beautiful, a vibrant painting on parchment showing the known coasts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. But its true value lies in the western edge. There, floating in the Atlantic, is a large, unfamiliar landmass labeled Terra del Brasil. This is one of the very first depictions of Brazil on any European map, recorded just 2 years after Pedro Álvares Cabral's fleet first made landfall there. The Portuguese crown considered this information more valuable than gold. They had just, by sheer accident or brilliant navigation, stumbled upon a continent that lay squarely within their sphere of influence as defined by the Pope himself. A few years earlier, in 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas had drawn an imaginary line down the Atlantic, dividing the unexplored world between Spain and Portugal. Everything east of the line belonged to Lisbon, everything west to Madrid. The Cantino planisphere was the ultimate proof that Portugal's eastern route had paid off, revealing a massive new territory that was legally and exclusively theirs. Possessing this map meant controlling the future. Its theft was an act of geopolitical warfare, allowing Italy, a neutral power, to see the new balance of the world. But the map holds a deeper secret than just the coast of Brazil. Look carefully to the south and the chart becomes tantalizingly vague. The coastline trails off into a series of speculative bays and capes with a label that speaks of mystery, land of the true cross. This was an early name for Brazil, but its placement and the shape of the coast here have fueled a century of debate. Does this ambiguous southern coastline represent mere guesswork, the cartographer's brush trailing off into the unknown? Or do these tentative lines hint at knowledge that Portuguese explorers were not yet ready to commit to parchment? Some researchers see in these curves a suggestion of the Rio de la Plata estuary, a massive river mouth that would not be officially discovered and mapped for another decade. Others wonder if the whispers from Cabral's crew, reports of land stretching far to the south, were cautiously integrated into the chart. The Cantino planisphere exists in a tense space between documented fact and strategic implication. It shows what Portugal knew for certain, and it subtly suggests what they suspected. Every line was a calculated disclosure, even on a stolen copy. This map forces us to view history not as a steady unveiling of truth, but as a secretive, competitive game. The places that shouldn't exist were not always ancient mysteries. Sometimes they were contemporary discoveries so valuable that their very existence had to be stolen, smuggled, and hidden in plain sight on a piece of art, waiting for the world to catch up. That act of cartographic theft revealed a world being claimed in secret, but the next map would declare a new reality to the entire world and give it a name. In the quiet German town of St. Diédes Vosges in 1507, a scholar named Martin Waldseemüller published a map that was less a chart and more a manifesto. Titled Universalis Cosmographia, it is a stunning woodcut masterpiece that did something no document had ever done before. In the southern hemisphere, on a long, slender landmass separated from Asia by a vast ocean, he printed a single, fateful word, America. With that act, he baptized a continent. The map is rightly famous for this christening, an homage to the explorer Amerigo Vespucci, whose accounts Waldseemüller had read. But the name is not the map's only revolutionary act. Look at its layout, and the true mystery comes into focus. Waldseemüller depicted the New World not as a series of islands clinging to Asia, but as a standalone continent, a distinct landmass with its own western coastline. And beyond that coastline, he drew a narrow strip of blue, labeling it Mare Oceanus Orientalis, the Eastern Ocean. This was the Pacific, shown on a European map a full 6 years before Vasco Núñez de Balboa would hack his way through the jungles of Panama to see it, and 14 years before Magellan would sail into its vast expanse. So how, from a landlocked workshop hundreds of miles from any port, did Waldseemüller know another ocean existed? The answer lies not in secret voyages, but in a brilliant and perhaps desperate act of interpretation. Waldseemüller and his colleagues were part of a scholarly circle dedicated to studying the latest discoveries. Their key source was a series of published letters from Amerigo Vespucci, who had sailed along the eastern coast of South America. Vespucci's accounts were vivid and convincing. He described a coastline that stretched for thousands of miles with a climate and peoples utterly unlike Asia. He wrote of a new world, a mundus novus. Reading these letters, Waldseemüller made a logical leap that others had not. If this land had a coast that ran continuously from the tropics far into the southern temperate zone, and if no known passage to Asia had been found along it, then this could not be the Indies. It must be something entirely new, a fourth part of the world. And if it was a continent, then, following the classical geographical models he trusted, it must be balanced by an ocean on its other side. The thin strip of Pacific on his map was therefore a deduction, a necessary consequence of his new theory. He was drawing the logical conclusion of Vespucci's observations. Yet, for all its groundbreaking insight, the Waldseemüller map is also a tapestry of speculation and tradition. That western coastline of the Americas is largely invented, a graceful guess. The Pacific is drawn as a narrow channel because Waldseemüller, still influenced by Ptolemy, drastically underestimated the size of the Earth. He thought the distance from Europe to Asia sailing west was short, so the new continent he placed in between could not be too wide. His map is thus a fascinating hybrid, a document that correctly identified a fundamental truth about the planet's geography while getting almost all the specifics wrong. It saw the forest but completely misjudged the size and shape of the trees. This duality is what makes the map so profoundly human. It represents the moment when European thought, armed with a few fragments of new data, dared to reimagine the cosmos. Waldseemüller had the courage to discard 1,000 years of assumption and draw what the evidence suggested must be there, even if he could not see it. He gave a name to the unknown, and in doing so, he predicted the existence of the planet's largest ocean from a small room in the mountains. The map is a testament to the power of an idea to reshape reality, proving that sometimes the most important places that shouldn't exist are the ones we first have to imagine. Waldseemüller's bold prediction stood on the edge of a new world, but just a century earlier, the map of the world was not a tool for navigation but a diagram of faith. In the workshop of a Venetian named Albertin de Verga between 1411 and 1415, a very different kind of world took shape. His map is a stunning circle of vellum, a perfect orb of ink and color that looks less like a chart and more like a sacred manuscript. At its heart, literally and spiritually, sits the city of Jerusalem. Radiating out from this divine center are the three known continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia, arranged not for accuracy but for symbolic order. Here, geography submits to theology. The map is populated not with accurate coastlines but with wondrous creatures and legendary kingdoms. Most prominently, it features the vast, wealthy realm of Prester John, a mythical Christian king believed to rule a paradise somewhere in the distant east, a beacon of hope and a potential ally against Islamic powers. By any modern standard, the de Verga world map is geographically fanciful, a place that shouldn't exist in reality, but to dismiss it as mere fantasy is to miss its profound purpose. This map is a classic example of the medieval mappa mundi, a world picture. Its goal was not to guide a sailor across the sea, but to guide a soul through the cosmos. It presented a complete, ordered universe where every strange creature and distant king had a place assigned by God, reinforcing a Christian understanding of creation. It was a map of meaning, not mileage, yet within this tapestry of belief, something remarkable happens. Look toward the southeast quadrant of de Verga's circle. There, amid the stylized rivers and painted mountains, the outline of the Indian subcontinent emerges with a startlingly recognizable shape. The Arabian Peninsula, too, is clearly defined. These are not mythical shapes, they are based on real, hard-won knowledge, likely filtered through Arab traders and travelers on the Silk Road. This is the fascinating tension at the core of the medieval mind. The same culture that fervently believed in Prester John's kingdom was also quietly collecting and integrating precise data about the actual world. The de Verga map is a palimpsest, a parchment where the emerging light of empirical observation shines through the vivid colors of legend. It captures a moment of transition where the world was beginning to be seen not just as a divine parable, but as a physical place to be measured. So, does this map belong in our collection of impossible places? As a literal guide, absolutely not, but as a psychological artifact, it is indispensable. It shows us that before we could map the world as it is, we first had to map it as we believed it must be. The real mystery it presents is not a lost continent, but a lost way of seeing, where faith drew the borders and hope filled in the blank spaces. The world of faith gave way to a world of royal secrets, guarded by a king who desperately needed an edge. In the court of Henry VIII of England, a French hydrographer named Jean Rots presented a gift in 1542, a lavish atlas intended to secure his position. Among its pages was a map that has since become a cornerstone of one of history's greatest what-ifs. It depicts a massive, mysterious landmass south of Indonesia, labeled Java La Grande. Its northern and western coastlines are not the vague blobs of myth, but sharply defined, with bays, capes, and inlets drawn with the confident detail of a surveyor. To the modern eye, the resemblance is uncanny. This is the shape of Australia, specifically the Gulf of Carpentaria and the western coast from Arnhem Land down toward Shark Bay. The problem is one of dates. The first documented European landing on Australian soil was by the Dutchman Willem Janszoon in 1606, a full 64 years after Rots drew his map. So what exactly was he copying? The evidence points not to England or France, but to Portugal. At the time, Portugal was the undisputed master of the Eastern Seas, with a policy of absolute secrecy regarding its charts. Leaking a map was a crime punishable by death. Rots, however, had previously worked for the Portuguese crown before entering English service. It is widely believed his atlas and the Dauphin map within it was based on stolen or copied Portuguese master charts, the very crown jewels of navigation. The place names on Java La Grande are the first clue. They are not in English or French, but in a mix of Portuguese and Malay, the lingua franca of the spice trade. Names like Beixos, meaning shoals, and Pontos, meaning points, suggest practical notes from sailors who had been there, not the fanciful titles of cartographers working from rumor. Then we have the voyages themselves. Portuguese ships were regularly sailing to the Spice Islands of the Moluccas, skirting the southern edge of the Timor Sea. From there, it is a short sail south into unknown waters. Strong, consistent southerly currents and seasonal winds, known as the trade winds, would have made it relatively easy for a ship blown off course or on a deliberate secret mission to be pushed onto the northern coast of Australia. We have fragmentary records of such voyages. One captain, Cristóvão de Mendonça, was reportedly sent on a mission in the 1520s to search for a legendary island of gold south of Sumatra. His fate is unknown, but his sailing instructions align perfectly with a route that would have encountered Australia. The case is compelling, yet frustratingly circumstantial. No surviving Portuguese document explicitly states they discovered a new continent. No wreck of a 16th century Portuguese ship has been found on Australian shores. This leaves us with a tantalizing possibility, a ghost in the historical record. The Jean Rots Atlas may be a rare leak, a glimpse of a discovery so valuable that Portugal chose to bury it, fearing that revealing a new, empty continent would divert resources from their lucrative spice trade in the Indies. They may have found Australia, mapped its coasts, and then decided it was a worthless desert, not worth the trouble of claiming. They filed it away, and the knowledge slowly seeped out through defectors like Rots, appearing on maps as a half-understood relic. So, does the Dauphin map prove a secret discovery? Not conclusively, but it stands as the strongest cartographic evidence that European eyes likely saw the great southern land long before the history books say they did, turning Australia from a theoretical place on a map into a real, charted coastline waiting in silence for the world to officially arrive. But the secrets of a continent are one thing, the secrets of a pharaoh's treasury are another. In a museum in Turin, Italy, rests a fragment of papyrus so ordinary in appearance it could be overlooked entirely. Cracked and faded, its surface is covered not in hieroglyphic tales of gods, but in careful lines, annotations, and washes of color depicting a stark, mountainous landscape. This is the Turin papyrus map, and it was drawn around 1,150 years before the Common Era. It is not a map of the world or even of Egypt. It is a map of a specific harsh region in the eastern desert, a detailed guide to the wadis, the dry riverbeds, the basalt hills, and most importantly, to the precious gold mines hidden within them. With this document, we are not looking at myth or speculation. We are holding a Bronze Age blueprint, a practical tool for extracting wealth from the earth, and in doing so, it shatters a long-held assumption about the history of science itself. For centuries, the narrative held that the science of mapping, of representing the physical world to scale with symbols and labels, began with the Greeks. Thinkers like Anaximander and Ptolemy were credited as the fathers of cartography. The Turin papyrus, quietly waiting in its glass case, proves this timeline wrong by over a millennium. This is not a symbolic or religious diagram. It is a true topographical map, the oldest surviving example in the world. Its creator used brown ink to sketch the contours of the valleys, black for the roads and settlements, and pink to highlight the actual veins of gold-bearing rock. Little notations written in hieratic script, a cursive form of hieroglyphs, label features like the mountain where gold is worked or the settlement of the quarrymen. It even includes accurate representations of the different types of stone in the region, from the dark, hard Beckhorn stone used for statues to the lighter sandstone. The map's purpose was intensely practical, born from royal necessity. It was almost certainly created for a state-sponsored mining expedition sent by the pharaoh Ramesses IV into the Wadi Hammamat. This desert region was the primary source of Egypt's gold, the literal foundation of its power and divinity. Sending a crew of laborers, soldiers, and artisans into that brutal, waterless terrain was a massive investment. The map was their insurance. It showed them the safest routes through the canyons, where to find the precious Beckhorn stone quarries, and precisely where to dig for gold. It transformed an unknown, dangerous wilderness into a known, manageable resource. This was not philosophy, it was logistics on papyrus. What makes this map a place that shouldn't exist is its startling modernity of thought. The cartographer employed techniques we would recognize today. He used a consistent, if local, scale. He understood perspective, drawing the wadi as if seen from above, with the bordering mountain ranges rendered in a profile view to show their distinctive shapes. He differentiated between the dry riverbeds that were passable and those that were not. This level of spatial understanding and symbolic communication reveals an administrative mind of remarkable sophistication. It tells us that the Egyptian state, at its height, operated with a bureaucratic precision that required accurate geographic information to function. The map is a fossilized thought process, a snapshot of a highly organized civilization applying reason to the land for a purely economic goal. So, why does this humble mining map belong alongside charts of phantom continents and secret discoveries? Because it challenges a different kind of boundary, the boundary of historical progress. It proves that the intellectual leap of cartography, the idea that space can be systematically represented, did not begin in the libraries of Greece. It began in the desert sun, in the hands of an Egyptian scribe trying to get a team to a gold mine and back alive. The Turin papyrus map forces us to redraw our mental map of human achievement. It shows that advanced, practical science was alive and well in the Bronze Age, turning a landscape of rock and sand into a calculated, profitable journey. This fragment of papyrus doesn't depict a place that shouldn't exist. It embodies an idea that, according to our old textbooks, arrived far too early. That Egyptian mining map reveals a world understood for its practical riches, but another civilization was mapping the world to understand its very soul. In the royal palace of Palermo, Sicily, in the year 1154, a scholar from Muslim Spain presented a king with a vision of the entire earth cast in solid silver. The geographer Al-Idrisi had spent 15 years working at the court of the Norman King Roger II, and their collaboration produced a masterpiece known as the Tabula Rogeriana. This was not just a map, it was an encyclopedia of the world, accompanied by a vast text called the Book of Pleasant Journeys into Faraway Lands. To look at it today is to experience a moment of profound disorientation followed by awe. The map is drawn with south at the top. This inversion is not a mistake, but a deliberate choice rooted in Islamic cartographic tradition, which often oriented maps toward Mecca. From this flipped perspective, a new world comes into focus. Africa dominates the top of the silver disk, with the Nile River flowing not into the Mediterranean from the south, but cascading down from a complex system of lakes and mountains at the map's summit. This depiction of the Nile sources, based on Arab and African travel accounts, was staggeringly accurate for its time, correctly showing the river originating from great lakes in the heart of the continent, a fact European maps would not grasp for another 700 years. The Indian Ocean, which Ptolemy had locked behind a wall of land, is here shown open and expansive, connecting to a world that stretches all the way to Korea and the islands of Southeast Asia. This accuracy was no accident. It was the product of a truly global synthesis. King Roger II was a Christian monarch, but his court was a beacon of intellectual fusion, where Arab, Jewish, Greek, and Norman scholars worked side by side. Al-Idrisi tapped into this rich environment. He systematically collected and compared knowledge from every source he could find. He interviewed Norman sailors and Arab merchants. He pored over the works of Greek geographers like Ptolemy, but he did not accept them blindly. He critically compared them with the first-hand accounts of Islamic travelers who had walked the Silk Road and sailed the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. He even integrated information from Viking navigators about the northern seas and distant islands. The Tabula Rogeriana was the Wikipedia of its age, a crowdsourced, peer-reviewed model of the planet. For the next 3 centuries, this map and its accompanying book represented the most accurate picture of the world available anywhere. European Mappa Mundi, still filled with mythical beasts and centered on Jerusalem, looked primitive by comparison. The Tabula Rogeriana showed a connected, knowable world from the fjords of Scandinavia to the spice ports of Malacca. It proved that geographic truth was not the property of any one culture or faith, but a puzzle whose pieces were scattered across the globe, waiting to be assembled by anyone with the curiosity and humility to listen. This silver map asks us a quiet, powerful question. What might we understand about our world today if we valued collaboration and synthesis over secrecy and conquest? It stands as a silent rebuke to the fractured knowledge of its time, and perhaps to our own. While Al-Idrisi's silver map synthesized global knowledge, other cartographers were filling the empty Atlantic with islands born of hope and hearsay. In the year 1436, the Venetian sailor Andrea Bianco drew a world map that includes a peculiar shape west of Portugal, a rectangular island with 7 distinct bays or inlets. Its label is simple, Antillia. This name, whispered among sailors for generations, would eventually christen an entire archipelago, the Antilles. But on Bianco's map, it is a solitary mystery, a place that exists only in the space between story and chart. The legend behind it is a haunting tale of escape. As the story goes, in the 8th century, when Muslim armies conquered the Iberian Peninsula, 7 Christian bishops fled westward across the ocean in a desperate bid to preserve their faith. They sailed until they found a large, uninhabited island where each bishop founded his own city. They then burned their ships, severing all ties with the old world, and vowed to live in pious isolation. This was the island of the 7 cities, a secret Christian kingdom waiting in the Atlantic mists, a beacon of salvation for the faithful. For centuries, this legend provided a powerful motive for exploration. It was not just about trade or conquest, it was a spiritual quest to reunite with lost brethren. The island appeared on chart after chart, always in the same general area of the Atlantic, its shape and size shifting with each retelling but its name constant, Antillia. Bianco, a practical navigator, included it not as a fairy tale, but as a documented feature of the maritime landscape, a place other sailors claimed to have seen on the horizon in certain lights. This practice was common. Cartographers would often populate blank stretches of ocean with these phantom islands, called flyaway lands, based on unverified sightings of cloud banks, mirages, or even schools of whales. They served as waypoints on mental charts and gave hope to crews on long voyages that land was always just over the next wave. Yet there is a curious detail on Bianco's version. The rectangular outline of his Antillia, with its series of indentations along one side, bears an uncanny, if simplistic, resemblance to the actual island of Puerto Rico. Could this be coincidence? Possibly, but it invites a tantalizing alternative. What if Antalya was not pure invention but a cartographic ghost, a distorted memory of a real landfall? Portuguese explorers pushing down the coast of Africa in the 14th century might have been blown far off course to the west by storms, catching a fleeting glimpse of a Caribbean island before being swept back to sea. Returning home, their fragmented report of a large island with many coves could have easily been folded into the existing legend of the Seven Cities, giving the myth a new, concrete shape. The island on the map then becomes a palimpsest, a layer of real geography overwritten by centuries of folklore. So was Antalya a real place, as the mythical island of Seven Cities? Almost certainly not. But as a placeholder for an actual, yet unidentified, landmass in the Western Atlantic, the possibility lingers. Bianco's map captures that perfect, elusive moment when a sailor's yarn begins to harden into a cartographic fact, guiding real ships toward a destination that was half dream, half discovery. It reminds us that sometimes the places that shouldn't exist are the ones we need to believe in, for they are the compass points that lead us to the places that do. The Miller Atlas is a crown jewel of statecraft, not just cartography. Commissioned for King Manuel I of Portugal in 1519, it is a breathtaking volume of vellum and gold leaf, a visual testament to a nation that had, in a single lifetime, redrawn the map of the world. Its central world map is a masterpiece of synthesis, weaving together the hard-won data from decades of Portuguese daring. The western coast of Africa, once a blank space of terror on medieval charts, is now rendered with meticulous, confident detail, a direct result of ship after ship pushing further south, rounding the Cape of Good Hope and opening the sea road to the Indies. The bulge of Brazil is clearly present, a new possession secured by Cabral's accidental landing. This map is the ultimate status report from the edge of the known, a classified document illustrating exactly how far Portuguese caravels had sailed and what they had claimed. To possess it was to hold the blueprint for global empire. Yet, for all its precision where Portugal had been, the map is profoundly speculative about what lay beyond. Dominating the southern hemisphere is an enormous, ghostly continent, a terra australis that sprawls across the bottom of the world. It is connected to South America and curls up toward Asia, effectively landlocking the Indian Ocean in a way that Ptolemy would have recognized. This was not lazy copying, but a calculated guess based on the best intelligence of the day. Portuguese sailors had encountered fierce southern currents and spotted distant, snow-capped mountains. The logical conclusion for the geographers in Lisbon was that these were glimpses of a single, massive landmass, a necessary counterweight to the continents of the north. They were mapping the limits of their knowledge as much as the coastline itself. This atlas arrived at a pivotal moment, in the very year Ferdinand Magellan set sail under the Spanish flag, seeking a western route to those same Spice Islands. The Miller Atlas shows the world as Portugal understood it on the eve of that voyage, a world still hemmed in by a theoretical southern continent. Within 3 years, Magellan's surviving crew would prove that continent was not where the map said it was, that a vast ocean lay beyond the strait that now bears his name. The Atlas, therefore, is a frozen moment of supreme confidence just before a fundamental truth shattered it. It captures the poignant reality of exploration, where the most accurate map in existence could still be fundamentally, beautifully wrong about the shape of the world. The scientific controversy surrounding the Vinland map is a detective story written in atoms. At its heart is a simple chemical question: what is the ink made of? Initial analysis in the 1970s revealed the black lines contained a compound called anatase titanium dioxide, a specific crystalline form of titanium. This finding was a bombshell. High-purity anatase is a 20th century industrial product, a key component in modern white paints and sunscreens. Its presence seemed to be a smoking gun, proof that a forger had used modern materials to create a medieval fake. The case appeared closed, but science, like history, is rarely so absolute. Defenders of the map's authenticity launched a counter-investigation. They argued that annotates could occur naturally, formed in medieval inks through contamination. Perhaps the scribe used sand to blot the wet ink, and that sand contained traces of the mineral ilmenite, which can weather into annotates. Maybe the parchment itself, or the water used to mix the ink, introduced these tiny crystals. The debate entered a microscopic stalemate, with each side scrutinizing the same evidence and seeing different truths. Then, technology advanced. Researchers turned to particle accelerators, using powerful beams to conduct non-destructive, ultra-sensitive analysis of the ink's composition. These recent studies have added new layers of complexity, not clarity. Some tests suggest the annotace particles are indeed too pure and uniform to be medieval, pointing again to a modern origin. Others have detected trace elements within the ink that are consistent with 15th century recipes. The forensic evidence is now a mosaic of conflicting signals, a puzzle where every new piece seems to create two more questions. This leaves us with the map's content, the story it tells. Does the parchment itself whisper of its own authenticity? The depiction of Vinland is strikingly sparse, a simple, crude outline that matches the vague descriptions in the Norse sagas. It shows no rivers, no mountains, no settlements, just a rough island shape. This minimalism feels right, as if drawn by someone who had only heard second-hand accounts of a distant, wooded coast. There are no anachronistic details, no out-of-place features that would clearly betray a modern forger's knowledge. Yet, skeptics point to the map's Latin text, which includes a reference to Bishop Eirik Gnupsson, a real historical figure sent by the Pope to Greenland in the early 12th century. While this connection is tantalizing, some linguists argue the phrasing feels slightly off for the period, a subtle anachronism in grammar or style, so we are left in a limbo of probability. The map is either a breathtakingly lucky coincidence of chemistry and history, or a diabolically clever forgery that anticipated and confounded decades of scientific scrutiny. It is a perfect storm where every piece of evidence has an equal and opposite interpretation. The Vinland map is no longer just an artifact, it is a mirror, reflecting our own desire to solve the past and the frustrating, beautiful reality that some mysteries are built to endure. Gerardus Mercator's name is forever tied to the map projection that made global navigation possible, but his own masterwork contained a polar mystery. In 1569, he published a large world map designed for sailors, employing his revolutionary system of straight room lines to keep compass courses true. Yet in the northern blank space, where most cartographers left a void, Mercator inserted a detailed inset of the Arctic. It shows a massive, circular continent centered directly on the North Pole, split into 4 distinct islands by fierce rivers that churn into a colossal whirlpool. At the very pole sits a single, black, magnetic mountain he called the Rupes Nigra. To the modern eye, this looks like pure fantasy, a medieval legend given cartographic form. And in many ways it was. Mercator was a brilliant mathematician, but he was also a product of his time, synthesizing every source he could find. His primary reference was a now-lost book called the Inventio Fortunata, or The Fortunate Discovery, an account from the 14th century supposedly written by a Franciscan friar who traveled to the far north. This book described the Arctic exactly as Mercator drew it, with the 4-land division and the magnetic black rock that pulled compass needles toward it. This was not mere decoration, it was a scientific hypothesis. Sailors knew compass behavior grew erratic in high latitudes, and the concept of a giant lodestone mountain at the pole offered a perfect, elegant explanation for the phenomenon. Mercator was mapping a theory of physics. However, a radical reinterpretation has emerged in recent decades. Authors like Rand Flem Ath have looked past the mythological framing and focused purely on the shapes. They note that if you take Mercator's circular Arctic continent and reproject it onto a different map type, one centered on the South Pole instead of the North, the landmasses bear a provocative resemblance to the coastlines of Antarctica. The four dividing channels could then be seen as the Transantarctic mountain range and other major features. In this view, Mercator was not drawing a northern myth at all, but inadvertently copying a much older, scrambled map of the southern continent, placed at the wrong pole by a copyist's error centuries before. The idea is audacious, suggesting a fragment of ancient Antarctic knowledge survived, was mislabeled, and was dutifully recorded by the greatest cartographer of the Renaissance. Mainstream scholarship finds this a bridge too far. Historians point out that Mercator also cited other contemporary sources, like the travels of the Englishman Martin Frobisher, whose reports of a western entrance to the Arctic likely influenced the map's northwestern passages. The circular continent with four rivers was a standard motif in medieval cosmological diagrams, representing the four rivers of paradise. Mercator was simply doing what all great mapmakers did, weaving together cutting-edge data, respected texts, and classical lore to fill the blank spaces. His Arctic is a palimpsest of belief, not a misplaced continent, so we are left with two compelling narratives. One sees a brilliant man reconciling sailors' logs with magnetic theory and medieval romance. The other sees a cryptic fossil, a map of Antarctica hiding in plain sight at the top of the world. Mercator's Arctic forces a choice. Do we see the birth of scientific cartography or the death rattle of a forgotten geography? His map is a testament to the fact that even the most precise mind must sometimes draw what it cannot see, guided by stories from the edge of the world. Even the greatest navigator can be fooled by the sea. Captain James Cook's charts of the Pacific are monuments to precision, the result of years spent battling storms and reefs to fix coastlines with unprecedented accuracy. Yet on his map of the Coral Sea, drawn in the 1770s, a small but confident notation marks a place called Sandy Island. It was a speck of land, a potential haven or hazard for any ship following in his wake. For over 2 centuries, this island remained on official British Admiralty charts, a fact verified by countless voyages. Then, in 2012, a team of Australian scientists sailed to its exact coordinates. Their depth sounders revealed nothing but open, abyssal water over 4,000 feet deep. Sandy Island did not exist. It was a cartographic ghost that had haunted maps for nearly 250 years. How could such an error survive the age of satellites? The answer lies in the chain of trust that defines mapmaking. Cook himself likely never saw the island. His logs suggest he may have recorded its position based on a report from another ship, perhaps the whaler Velocity in 1774, whose crew logged a sighting of breaking waves and sandy shores in that lonely stretch of sea. What they saw was almost certainly not land, but a temporary mirage. In the tropical Pacific, a dense pumice raft, a floating island of volcanic rock, can emerge from a submarine eruption, looking for all the world like a solid shore. A bank of low-lying cloud on the horizon can also mimic a coastline with uncanny precision under certain atmospheric conditions. Cook, prioritizing safety, marked the potential hazard. Later cartographers, seeing the island on the great captain's own chart, copied it faithfully. No subsequent captain would risk sailing through a charted island to disprove it. They would simply sail around the empty space. The island persisted through sheer authority, a mistake enshrined by reputation. This phantom's long life reveals a profound truth about our relationship with maps. We trust them more than our own eyes, more than the empty ocean before us. Sandy Island was a shared fiction, a place that existed only because a line on paper said it should. Its final erasure in 2012 was a quiet admission that our knowledge is always provisional, a reminder that every map, no matter how scientific, is ultimately a story we tell about the world, and sometimes the stories are wrong. The line between a map and a mind is thinner than we might believe. In the shadowy world of Cold War espionage, the United States Central Intelligence Agency launched a program that sounds like pure science fiction. It was called Project Stargate, and its goal was to weaponize the human imagination. For over 2 decades, from the 1970s into the 1990s, the agency recruited and trained individuals known as remote viewers. Their task was not to analyze satellite photos or debrief defectors, but to sit in a quiet room, enter a meditative state, and attempt to psychically perceive distant, secret locations. They would then describe and sketch what they saw. The results were a new kind of map, drawn not from survey or surveillance, but from purported psychic intuition. Declassified files from the project include dozens of these drawings, ranging from crude doodles to surprisingly detailed schematics. One often cited case involves a viewer tasked with locating a particular individual abroad. The viewer produced a sketch of a large, walled compound with specific architectural features, including a unique curved driveway and a distinct pattern of trees. When analysts later compared the sketch to satellite imagery of the actual location, they found striking correspondences: the layout, the shape of the building, even the placement of the driveway and foliage seemed to match. The viewer had apparently described a place they had never visited, seen, or been briefed on, a place that, by all conventional logic, should have been inaccessible. The methodology was systematic. A handler who knew the real target coordinates would give the viewer only an arbitrary set of numbers, a sort of psychic address. The viewer would then relax, clear their mind, and allow impressions to form, dictating sensations, images, and geometric shapes to the handler. These sessions were often conducted under strict double-blind protocols designed to prevent any conscious or unconscious leakage of information. Proponents point to these procedural safeguards and the occasional dramatic hit as evidence that something real was happening, that human consciousness might have a non-local capacity to access information across space and time. They argue these psychic sketches are maps of a different order, charting territories known only to the mind. Yet the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community remains one of profound skepticism. Critics argue that the hits within Project Stargate were statistical anomalies, the rare successes highlighted among a vast sea of vague misses and outright failures. The descriptions produced by viewers were often fuzzy, symbolic, and open to broad interpretation. A sketched shape could be made to fit many different buildings in hindsight. This is known as subjective validation, where we retroactively find meaning in ambiguous information. Furthermore, the very nature of the task invites what psychologists call front-loading, where even subtle cues from a handler can steer a viewer's imagination. While the program was eventually terminated, citing a lack of consistent, actionable intelligence, its legacy endures in those strange declassified folders. So what are we to make of these psychic maps? They represent the ultimate 20th century twist on our theme. These are not charts of lost continents or mislabeled islands, but attempts to map the present-day world using a faculty that mainstream science says does not exist. They are documents of a desperate, clandestine war fought not just with technology, but with the outer limits of human potential. Whether you see them as curiosities from the fringe of espionage or as fragile evidence of a deeper layer to reality, they force a provocative question. If a map is simply a representation of a place, does it matter if the survey was done by a satellite or by a quiet mind in a Virginia office building? Both, in their own way, are trying to draw the unknowable. The mind's map of a distant compound gives way to a celestial one, charted not by telescopes but by stories passed down for generations. In the remote Bandiagara escarpment of Mali, the Dogon people have preserved a cosmology that maps the heavens with impossible precision. For centuries, their oral traditions and intricate sand drawings have described the star system of Sirius, the brightest in our sky, in a way that defies simple explanation. They speak of Sirius not as a single point of light, but as a system. They teach of a primary star they call Siggi-Tolo, and a second, incredibly dense and invisible companion star they call Potolo, meaning the seed star. This companion, they say, is made of a metal heavier than iron, is white in color, and orbits Sirius in an elliptical path every 50 years. To modern astronomy, this description is not myth. It is a precise technical account of Sirius B, a white dwarf star. This stellar corpse is so small and faint it was first glimpsed through a telescope in 1862, and its 50-year elliptical orbit and incredible density were not confirmed until the early 20th century. The doggone knowledge presents a profound cartographic puzzle. How could a people without optical instruments map an invisible star with such specific, accurate data? The mystery entered the Western world through the work of French anthropologists Marcel Grioul and Germain Dieterlen, who spent decades living with the doggone in the 1930s and 40s. They recorded the tribe's complex cosmogony in meticulous detail, including the astonishing Sirius lore. Grioul's interpretation was straightforward. He believed he was documenting an intact, ancient system of knowledge, preserved through secret societies and initiation rites. This led to a tantalizing and controversial hypothesis. Perhaps the doggone were the recipients of astronomical wisdom from a much older, advanced civilization, maybe even visitors from the stars themselves, who imparted this celestial map in the distant past. The idea captured the public imagination, suggesting a lost chapter in human history where cosmic truths were shared. Yet, the map of this mystery soon became contested territory. In the decades following Grioul's work, other anthropologists raised serious critiques. They pointed to the possibility of cultural contamination. By the time of Grioul's intensive study, the doggone had been in contact with European missionaries, traders, and soldiers for generations. Sirius B was a topic of popular astronomy by the early 1900s. Is it possible that this modern knowledge was inadvertently transmitted to the doggone, who then ingeniously wove it into their own rich symbolic framework? The anthropologist Walter van Beek, who later studied the doggone, reported that most villagers he spoke with showed little detailed knowledge of the Sirius system, suggesting the complex lore might have been held by a very few elders interacting closely with Grioul. Furthermore, scholars of symbolism offer an alternative reading. In doggone cosmology, everything begins with a tiny seed, the Po, which contains the vibration of the entire universe. The seed star orbiting Sirius could be a profound metaphor for this concept, a symbolic representation of the origin of matter rather than a literal astronomical description. The precise numbers and orbits might then be part of a metaphysical map of creation, not a scientific star chart. So we are left with two compelling and irreconcilable interpretations. One sees the doggone knowledge as a stunning anomaly, a stellar map that charted a truth invisible to the naked eye, suggesting a pipeline to forgotten wisdom. The other sees a beautiful example of cultural synthesis and symbolic thought, where modern facts were absorbed and transformed into myth, creating a map of meaning rather than matter. This is not a map you can hold, but a map you must hear in story and see in ritual. It challenges our very definition of what a map is for. Is its purpose to document physical reality or to chart the landscape of the human mind, connecting the stars above to the seeds of understanding below? The doggone star map, whether ancient artifact or modern mosaic, reminds us that sometimes the most accurate chart is the one that guides not our ships but our souls. The most consequential voyage in history began with a map that was wrong in almost every way. We do not have the exact chart Christopher Columbus used to plan his journey in 1492, but we can reconstruct its worldview from his own journals and from surviving artifacts like the Behaim globe, created just a year before his departure. That worldview was a cramped, misshapen place. It showed a single ocean, the Mare Oceanum, separating Europe from Asia. Crucially, it depicted the Earth as far smaller than it actually is, and Asia as stretching much farther east than it does. These were not minor errors, they were foundational miscalculations that warped reality. When Columbus read the travels of Marco Polo, he absorbed Polo's exaggerated distances. When he studied the ancient calculations of Ptolemy, he chose the smallest possible estimate for the planet's circumference. He cherry-picked every piece of data that supported his desired conclusion, stitching them together into a mental map that made his dream feasible. On this map, Japan lay roughly where the Bahamas actually are, a journey he believed his ships could survive. The map he trusted showed a world that shouldn't have led him to success, but to a watery grave in an endless sea. And yet, it did lead to success of a kind he never imagined. His triumphant landfall on an island he named San Salvador was, in his mind, the outer islands of the Indies. He died believing he had reached Asia, that his flawed map had been vindicated. The bitter irony is that his monumental error was only possible because of a previous, equally profound error in cartography. He found a new world because he was looking for an old one, and his map told him it was just over the horizon. This reveals a terrifying truth about human endeavor. We are often propelled forward not by perfect knowledge, but by confident misunderstanding. Columbus was not a visionary who saw beyond the maps of his time. He was a man utterly enslaved by their most optimistic mistakes. His story forces us to ask how many breakthroughs begin with a wrong turn. The discovery of the Americas was the ultimate, brutal proof that the most authoritative maps of the age were not just incomplete but fundamentally wrong. They depicted a planet that did not exist, a planet without these two vast continents. The real map, the true shape of the world, had been waiting all along, and it took a stubborn man armed with a faulty chart to accidentally stumble upon it, rewriting history by failing to reach his destination. The ocean floor became the ultimate secret battlefield of the Cold War. In the early 1970s, a team of American analysts and engineers pored over maps of a desolate patch of the North Pacific, roughly 1,700 miles northwest of Hawaii. These were not ordinary nautical charts. They were staggeringly detailed bathymetric maps showing the contours, canyons, and sediment layers of the seafloor 3 miles down. Their singular purpose was to guide one of the most audacious and secret intelligence operations in history, the recovery of the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129. This vessel had sunk under mysterious circumstances in March 1968, taking with it its crew, its nuclear torpedoes, and most importantly, its codebooks and encryption machinery. For the United States Central Intelligence Agency, it was a priceless treasure chest resting on the abyssal plain. The operation, codenamed Project Azorian, was a feat of engineering so outlandish it seemed ripped from a spy novel. The agency would need to construct a massive, purpose-built ship, the Hughes Glommer Explorer, publicly disguised as a deep-sea mining vessel owned by the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. Its real mission was to lower a gigantic mechanical claw, 3 miles of piping, and secretly grab the submarine from the ocean floor. But before a single piece of steel could be cut, they needed a map, a perfect, 3-dimensional blueprint of a place no human would ever see. Creating that map was an intelligence triumph in itself. The initial location of the wreck was pinpointed by the United States Navy's secret underwater sound surveillance system, a network of hydrophones on the seafloor that could track submarine movements. Once a general area was identified, the CIA deployed specially equipped ships to conduct a silent, detailed survey. They used advanced towed sonar arrays, essentially long cables studded with listening devices, which were dragged back and forth over the target zone like mowing a lawn in utter darkness. Each pass painted a clearer sonic picture of the terrain below, revealing not just the depth but the hardness of the seabed, the slope of hills, and the presence of obstacles. This data was then translated into the operational maps that would guide the Glommer Explorer's crew. Every contour line on those charts had a life or death consequence. The engineers needed to know if the seafloor was firm enough to support the submarine's wreckage without it being swallowed by mud. They needed to map the precise orientation of the hull to position their claw. They needed to identify every boulder and ridge that could snag their 3-mile-long tether. In essence, they were mapping a battlefield 18,000 feet beneath the waves, a place that, for all official purposes, did not exist. The existence of these maps represents a cartographic paradox. They depicted a real, physical location with incredible accuracy, a place defined by longitude, latitude, and depth. Yet, this place had no name on any public chart. Its significance was not geological but geopolitical. It was a secret coordinate, a dot on the globe that represented the epicenter of a clandestine war for knowledge. For the planners of Project Azorian, this spot on the Pacific floor was the most important place in the world, and their maps were the key to unlocking it. The operation itself was a mixture of spectacular success and heartbreaking failure. The Glommer explorer did reach the site, lower its apparatus, and recover a portion of the submarine. The world only learned of the attempt years later, and many details remain classified. But the legacy of those bathymetric charts endures. They symbolize a new frontier in mapping, where the goal is not to explore for commerce or science, but to exploit a secret. This was cartography as a weapon, a tool for reclaiming history from the deep. It asks us a pointed question: how many other precise, detailed maps exist in vaults around the world, charting places that, for reasons of state security, are officially blank spaces on our public atlases? The map of the K-129 wreck site is a phantom, a detailed portrait of a location that, in the public record, must forever remain a mystery. Satellite eyes now watch every inch of our planet, promising a map with no more blank spaces. Yet the digital globe has not ended our search for the impossible, it has simply moved it online. Armed with nothing but a laptop and curiosity, a new generation of explorers now combs the pixelated landscapes of Google Earth, hunting for anomalies that whisper of lost civilizations. Their discoveries range from the breathtakingly real to the compellingly mistaken, creating a modern mythology written in sand, rock, and shadow. Perhaps the most famous are the Nazca lines of Peru, giant geoglyphs of animals, plants, and geometric shapes etched into the desert plateau. From the ground, they are mere scratches in the earth, but from the satellite view, their true, monumental scale and purpose are revealed. They are a map for the gods, or perhaps for something looking down from above, created over 2,000 years ago by a culture we are only beginning to understand. The satellite perspective makes their artistry and their enduring mystery undeniable, but the hunt does not stop with known wonders. Enthusiasts zoom into the empty deserts of Egypt beyond the famous pyramids of Giza and point to strange, mound-like formations with suspiciously symmetrical shadows. They argue these could be undiscovered pyramids buried for millennia under the shifting sands, their angular outlines just visible from space. In the steppes of Kazakhstan, vast geometric earthworks called the steppe geoglyphs were first identified using Google Earth. These colossal squares, crosses, and rings, some over 900 feet across, are made of earthen mounds and would be invisible to anyone standing on the ground. Their purpose is utterly unknown, a giant puzzle laid out for the sky. Then the search goes beneath the waves. Off the coast of the Bahamas lies the Bimini Road, a half-mile line of rectangular limestone blocks resting on the seafloor. From above, it looks unnervingly like a paved road or a collapsed wall. For decades, it has been cited as potential evidence for the lost continent of Atlantis. The geological consensus, however, is firm. This is a spectacular example of natural beach rock formation. The blocks are not cut stone, but fractured limestone that naturally breaks into straight lines and right angles due to its bedding planes. It is a masterpiece of geology, not masonry. This is the critical lesson of the digital anomaly hunt. Our brains are wired for pattern recognition, a phenomenon called pareidolia. We see faces in clouds and castles in rock formations. When presented with ambiguous shapes from a satellite, we instinctively try to assemble them into something familiar, something built. A natural ridge becomes a sunken wall. A glacial moraine becomes the foundations of a city. The low resolution of some imagery adds to the illusion, smoothing rough edges into straight lines. Mainstream archaeology welcomes satellite discovery. It has led to legitimate finds like the Kazakh geoglyphs or lost Roman forts in Britain. But it also requires rigorous ground truthing, the physical investigation that separates a natural formation from a human one. The Google Earth detective represents a profound shift in our relationship with the unknown. The treasure map is now universal, free, and in our pockets. Anyone can be an explorer, scanning continents for the next great mystery. This democratization of discovery is thrilling, but it also demands a new kind of literacy, the ability to balance wonder with skepticism. We are mapping the final frontiers of our own planet, and in the process, learning that the most compelling places that shouldn't exist are often the ones we build in the fertile space between what we see and what we desperately wish to find. But the sea holds its secrets close, and none are more tightly guarded than those of the master mariners of the medieval Mediterranean. In the quiet archives of a library, a map drawn on sheepskin waits. It is the Carta Pisana from the year 1275, and it belongs to a mysterious family of documents known as Portolan charts. To the modern eye, these maps are shockingly familiar. They depict the coastlines of the Mediterranean and Black Sea with a crisp, almost modern accuracy, their shorelines traced with a confidence that seems to leap centuries ahead of the symbolic, land-centered mappa mundi of the same period. But the true marvel is the web of lines that covers the sea itself, a spiderweb of 32 directions radiating from central points. These are room lines, constant compass courses that allowed a navigator to sail from one port to another simply by keeping his ship aligned with the correct line. This was not a philosophical diagram, it was a working tool for surviving the open water, and that is the heart of the mystery. These charts appear suddenly in the 13th century, fully formed, with no crude prototypes, no evolutionary steps showing gradual improvement. It is as if someone dropped a detailed technical manual into the middle of the so-called Dark Ages. Where did they come from? The most straightforward theory points to practical necessity. As maritime trade exploded in the medieval Mediterranean, sailors needed reliable guides. They began by making simple sketch maps, noting landmarks, sailing distances, and compass bearings between ports. Over generations, these local notes were compiled, compared, and refined by practical mariners in port cities like Genoa, Venice, and Majorca. The room line system may have been a brilliant innovation born from the daily use of the magnetic compass, which arrived in Europe around this time. In this view, the Portolan charts are a triumph of bottom-up empirical knowledge, forged on the decks of ships, not in royal libraries. Yet, their precision is so advanced that many researchers suspect a more ancient pedigree. Could they be copies of much older Roman charts? The Roman Empire was a maritime power, and it is logical they would have created detailed coastal maps for their navy and merchants. If a few of these survived the empire's collapse, perhaps in monastery libraries or Arab translations, they could have been rediscovered and copied by medieval sailors who then added the new room line system. An even more tantalizing possibility involves the Arab world. Islamic scholars were masters of astronomy, mathematics, and geography. Arab traders dominated the Indian Ocean with sophisticated navigational techniques. It is plausible that their cartographic knowledge filtered into the Mediterranean through cultural hubs like Sicily or Al-Andalus in Spain, providing the geometric framework that European sailors then applied to their own coast. But there is a third, more speculative thread. The accuracy of the Portolan charts, particularly in their depiction of the Mediterranean as a whole, suggests an understanding of its true shape and proportions that seems to exceed what could be gathered from piecemeal coastal sailing alone. This has led some, like historian Charles Hapgood, to propose they are fragments of a far older global cartography, preserved and adapted by medieval seamen who no longer understood their scientific origin. The charts themselves are silent on their ancestry. They bear no author's name, no date of the original survey. They are pure function, a testament to the anonymous guilds of pilots and chart makers who guarded their knowledge as a trade secret. So we are left with a powerful artifact that defies simple explanation. The Portolan charts are both profoundly ordinary and deeply anomalous. They are the workaday tools of sailors, stained with salt and wax, yet they represent a quantum leap in geographic thought that history cannot fully account for. They force us to wonder if the light of classical knowledge ever truly went out, or if it was kept alive in the rolling cabins of merchant ships, passed from pilot to apprentice in a whispered tradition that left no record except the lines on the parchment. In these maps, the practical and the miraculous are woven together as tightly as the room lines on the sea. A single line drawn in Paris in 1531 appears to trace a coastline buried under a mile of ice. Laurent Finet, the same mathematician who gave us the heart-shaped world map, produced another work that year, a polar projection centered on the South Pole. It is known as the Phineas map, and it presents a vision of Antarctica so detailed and so peculiar that it has become a cornerstone of the ancient knowledge debate. Unlike the theoretical landmass on his other map, this southern continent is drawn with startling specificity. It is not a smooth blob, but a ragged, complex coastline, etched with deep inlets, wide bays, and what look unmistakably like rivers flowing from a mountainous interior into what he labels the Mer Austral, the Southern Sea. The land is clearly depicted as ice-free, a temperate continent with estuaries and channels. To the modern eye, this is not just a guess, it is a portrait. And when you take that portrait and lay it over a modern map of the subglacial bedrock of Antarctica, the result is for many a shock of recognition. The eastern side of Finet's continent aligns with the coast of Queen Maud Land. A prominent peninsula on his map matches the Antarctic peninsula known as Graham Land. Most strikingly, the large, forked bay cutting into the center of his landmass corresponds almost perfectly with the Ross Sea and the Weddell Sea, two massive indentations that nearly slice Antarctica in two. The rivers he drew seem to follow the paths of today's major glacial flows, like the Recovery Glacier system. For proponents of a lost civilization, this is not a coincidence. It is evidence. They argue that Finet must have had access to source maps from an ancient seafaring culture that explored Antarctica during a warm period in the distant past, when its coasts were clear and its rivers ran to the sea. This knowledge, they say, was preserved in libraries like that of ancient Alexandria, survived through copies in Constantinople or the Islamic world, and eventually filtered to Renaissance scholars like Finet, who dutifully copied it without understanding what he was drawing. The map, in this view, is a fossil, a precise snapshot of a world that vanished beneath the ice thousands of years before his birth. The emotional power of this alignment is undeniable. It feels like finding a key that fits a lock we didn't know existed. But the skeptical view requires us to step back from that awe and examine the map as a product of its own time, not ours. Critics point out that the idea of a great southern continent, a terra australis, was a fixed feature of Renaissance geography. It was a philosophical necessity, and every cartographer drew their own version based on the scant reports available. Finet's primary source for this region likely wasn't a prehistoric survey, but the widely read accounts of Marco Polo. The Venetian explorer wrote of a vast southern land called Locac, a place of great wealth and strange animals. Polo never saw it himself. He was reporting Chinese or Malay legends, but his description was taken as gospel by European geographers. Finet, a brilliant synthesizer, would have taken Polo's report of a massive land and combined it with the few concrete facts he had. By 1531, Portuguese ships had rounded the Cape of Good Hope and sailed into the Indian Ocean. They had encountered fierce winds and currents pushing north from the south, which they interpreted as flowing from a large landmass. Finet likely had access to these Portuguese reports. His map, then, is a creative act of interpolation. He knew a big continent had to be there, philosophy demanded it. He knew from sailors that its northern edges might have bays and rivers, so he drew it using his mathematical skill to project it onto a polar view, filling the empty space with the most logical geographic features his mind could conceive. The correlations we see today, skeptics argue, are a classic case of selective pattern matching. We are focusing on the features that align and ignoring the many that do not. Ferney's continent is still connected to South America on his map, a clear geographic error. The scale is wildly off. The interior details are generic, the kind of cartographic filler used for any unexplored region. The rivers are where any artist might put them to suggest a living landscape. In short, the map is a brilliant work of speculative cartography, not a survey. So we are left with two irreconcilable interpretations, each rooted in a different view of human history. One sees a miraculous transmission of data across millennia. The other sees the ingenious work of a Renaissance mind, weaving threads of rumor, legend, and deduction into a compelling and ultimately false image. The Phineas map does not ask us to choose between fact and fiction, but between two different kinds of truth. Is it the truth of a forgotten past preserved by chance, or is it the truth of the human intellect capable of imagining a world so vividly that it sometimes accidentally brushes against reality? The stark lines of the Phineas map force a confrontation with a deep human longing, the desire for a world more dramatic and mysterious than the one we inhabit. This longing found its ultimate expression not in single anomalous charts, but in the wholesale invention of entire continents. By the late 19th century, as the last blank spaces on the map were being filled, a powerful countercurrent emerged, one that insisted the greatest lands of all were not undiscovered but lost. This brings us to the phantom cartography of Mu and Lemuria, maps drawn not from surveys but from dreams. In the 1870s, a French-American archaeologist named Augustus Le Plongeon, working among the Maya ruins of Yucatan, claimed to have deciphered a story far older than the pyramids. He said ancient tablets told of a vast, advanced civilization called Mu that once dominated the Pacific Ocean. According to Le Plongeon, this was the motherland of all human culture, a tropical paradise that catastrophically sank beneath the waves, its survivors seeding the civilizations of Egypt and the Americas. He never produced the tablets, but his ideas inspired a wave of imaginative cartography. Maps began to appear showing Mu as a continent-sized landmass stretching from the Marianas Islands to Easter Island, with its capital city at the mythical spot now called the Pacific Garbage Patch. A few decades later, the legend was supercharged by a retired British colonial officer, James Churchward. He claimed that while serving in India, he had been shown ancient, secret clay tablets by a Hindu priest. These tablets, written in the lost language of the Nokal, supposedly contained the history of Mu. Churchward published detailed maps depicting the continent with mountain ranges, rivers, and even the locations of its 70 million inhabitant cities. His Mu was an idyllic, technologically advanced society that met its end when subterranean gas chambers exploded, causing the entire land to sink in a single day and night of fire. These maps were precise, authoritative, and utterly fabricated, a blend of Churchward's own colonial-era travels and a vivid imagination. Parallel to the Pacific myth, another lost continent rose in the Indian Ocean. The name Lemuria was first coined not by a mystic but by a scientist. In the 1860s, zoologists were puzzled by the presence of lemur fossils in Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East. To explain this distribution, biologist Philip Sclater proposed a hypothetical land bridge that had once connected the two regions. He called it Lemuria. This was a legitimate, if incorrect, scientific hypothesis for its time, but the idea was swiftly snatched from the realm of geology and transformed by the burgeoning theosophical movement founded by Helena Blavatsky. In her seminal work, The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky described Lemuria as the home of the third root race of humanity, a giant hermaphroditic egg-laying species with a third eye. Theosophical maps showed Lemuria as a sprawling continent covering most of the southern Indian Ocean, connecting to parts of Africa, Australia, and even reaching toward California. These maps of Mu and Lemuria are fascinating cultural artifacts because they represent a complete inversion of the cartographic process. They did not document reality, they invented it to support a belief system. They were drawn to give physical form to spiritual or pseudo-historical narratives, to provide a lost golden age that could explain the perceived mysteries of ancient monuments or the origins of esoteric wisdom. The coastlines were not the result of soundings or sightings, but of psychic revelation, channeled writing, and creative interpretation of myth. They filled the empty oceans with a past that was more appealing than the unknown abyss. The modern science of plate tectonics, fully developed in the mid-20th century, quietly dismantled the need for these phantom continents. We now understand that the Earth's crust is a dynamic puzzle of shifting plates. Continents move, but they do so at the speed a fingernail grows. They collide to build mountains like the Himalayas, and they rift apart to create oceans like the Atlantic. The distribution of lemurs is explained by the fact that Madagascar and India were once part of the same landmass, Gondwana, which slowly broke apart over tens of millions of years. There is no geological evidence whatsoever for a Pacific continent that sank within human memory, nor for a recent land bridge of the scale described for Lemuria. The ocean floors are mapped, and they tell a story of volcanic ridges and deep trenches, not drowned cities, yet the maps persist in popular culture. They speak to something enduring, a nostalgia for a world where history holds grand, catastrophic secrets, where our ancestors were giants in both body and spirit. The cartography of Mu and Lemuria is a mirror, reflecting our own romantic yearning for a past that explains our present in epic terms. It asks us a poignant question: when the real story of our planet, written in stone and magma over billions of years, is so profoundly majestic, why do we still feel the need to invent lost worlds? Perhaps because, in the end, the most compelling map is the one that charts the landscape of our imagination, a territory that no satellite will ever fully survey. While dreamers charted lost continents, a silent eye opened in the cold vacuum of space, mapping a hidden reality. The year was 1959, and the United States was desperate for a true map of its greatest adversary. Spy planes like the U-2 could skim the edge of the Soviet Union, but flying directly over it meant certain destruction. The solution was not to fly at the edge of the atmosphere, but to leap beyond it entirely. This was the birth of the Corona program, a top-secret project to put a camera in orbit. Its mission was not scientific, but cartographic on a global, clandestine scale, to create the first detailed photographic atlas of the entire Soviet Union and Communist China, places that were, for Western intelligence, vast blank spaces concealing armies and missiles. For over a decade, Corona satellites, disguised as civilian space research missions, whirled silently overhead. They carried not advanced digital sensors, but something more tangible: large-format film cameras. These were technological marvels designed to eject canisters of exposed film that would plunge back through the atmosphere, be snatched mid-air by specially equipped aircraft over the Pacific Ocean, and rushed to analysts in Washington. The maps they produced were not drawn with ink, but assembled from millions of grains of silver halide on strips of celluloid. Each photograph was a revelation, a god's-eye view of a forbidden world. Analysts in darkrooms would pore over these images with magnifying glasses and stereoscopes, piecing together a hidden geography. They were not looking for cities or rivers, but for the subtle, telltale signs of military power. A new circular pattern in a remote field might reveal a surface-to-air missile battery. unusual construction near a rail line could betray a nuclear weapons storage bunker. The faint scars of roads leading into a mountainside might point to a hidden command center. Through painstaking work, they transformed abstract photographic intelligence into a functional, tactical map of the Cold War, charting the precise locations of thousands of military and industrial targets. The existence of these orbital maps was one of the era's most closely guarded secrets, more valuable than any fleet of bombers. They provided something intangible yet priceless: certainty. For the first time, American planners could see the true scale and placement of Soviet forces, moving the enemy from the shadows of speculation into the harsh light of fact. This knowledge directly shaped nuclear strategy, diplomatic confrontations like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the very architecture of deterrence. The map was not just a picture, it was a shield and a sword drawn from space. Then, in 1995, in a move of both historical transparency and technological obsolescence, President Bill Clinton ordered the declassification of over 800,000 corona images. In an instant, a secret atlas of the world was opened to the public. Historians, archaeologists, and curious citizens suddenly had access to a unique time capsule, a high-resolution map of the planet as it was between 1959 and 1972. This was not the sanitized, peacetime globe we know today. It was a snapshot of a divided world at the height of tension, showing East German airfields now vanished, Soviet tank factories since reclaimed by forest, and Chinese nuclear test sites frozen in time. The corona maps became a paradoxical gift, a detailed record of a global standoff, now used to study environmental change, locate forgotten archaeological sites, and bear witness to a hidden chapter of history. They remind us that every map is created for a purpose, and the most precise ones are often drawn not out of curiosity, but out of fear, revealing as much about the cartographer's anxieties as they do about the lay of the land. The oldest known attempt to map the entire world is a circle pressed into clay. Around 600 years before the Common Era, in the ancient city of Sippar, a Babylonian scribe took a damp tablet and carefully inscribed a vision of the cosmos. This is the Babylonian world map, and it is not a chart for travelers. It is a diagram of belief, a philosophical statement carved in earth and fire. At its center is a simple rectangle labeled clearly Babylon. Radiating out from this heart are other rectangles representing real neighboring regions like Assyria and Urartu. But these known lands are encircled by a thick, circular band labeled Ma-Ra-Tu, the Bitter River. This is the ocean, conceived not as a connective highway, but as a definitive, terrifying boundary. And beyond that river, in the map's outer regions, the scribe drew 8 triangular shapes. Their labels are chilling. They read Nagu, meaning region, but with the haunting description beyond the flight of birds. This is the edge of the conceivable world, a place so distant that not even a bird could carry news back from it. Some triangles are further annotated with cryptic, mythic descriptions, like where the sun is not seen or a place of winged birds. The map masterfully blends the empirical and the mythological. We see real cities and rivers we can locate on a modern map, sitting comfortably beside lands that belong to legend and theology. This tablet was never meant to guide a merchant from Babylon to Assyria. They had simpler, practical route maps for that. This was a scholarly exercise, an attempt to answer the most profound questions of the age. Where does our known world end? What lies beyond the horizon of human experience? How does our city, our civilization, fit into the grand structure of creation? By placing Babylon at the literal center of this cosmic diagram, the map provided a powerful answer. It asserted a cosmological order, a sense of place and purpose for the Babylonian people within a vast, mysterious, and often threatening universe. The circular ocean was not just a geographic feature, it was a symbolic barrier between the ordered, civilized world of Mesopotamia and the chaotic, unknown outer void. The triangles in the beyond were placeholders for the ultimate mysteries, acknowledging that there were realms that defied human understanding. In its sophisticated layering of real geography with metaphysical speculation, this clay fragment achieves something astonishing. It is a world map that, by our modern standards of accuracy, shouldn't exist from such a remote time, yet it exists for a reason that transcends navigation. It maps the human mind's first brave attempt to draw the line between the known and the unknowable, to give shape to the infinite, and to find one's own city at the center of it all. This humble tablet reminds us that every map, from the satellite image to the sketch on a napkin, begins not with a measurement but with a question. Our final anomaly exists only in the glowing rectangle of a smartphone screen. The digital map, a living document updated by satellites and algorithms, promised to be our ultimate flawless atlas. Yet it has birthed its own breed of phantom towns and streets that dissolve upon arrival. In the rolling countryside of Lancashire, England, users of Google Maps for years could find directions to a place called Argleton. It appeared as a dot on the map, nestled between the real towns of Orton and Ormskirk. Curious travelers who went searching for it found only empty fields and a lone farmhouse. Argleton was a ghost in the machine, a digital settlement with no history, no buildings, and no reason to be. Its name, an anagram of not real G, only deepened the mystery when discovered. How does a non-existent town appear on the world's most sophisticated mapping platform? The answer lies in the secret, competitive world of digital cartography. Online maps are not drawn from scratch by a single company. They are colossal mosaics assembled from hundreds of sources, government surveys, satellite imagery, and crucially, commercial map data licensed from third-party companies. These data providers have long used a clever trick called a copyright trap or a paper town. To catch rivals who might be copying their maps without permission, they intentionally insert a small, fictitious feature, a fake street name, a non-existent park, or a tiny town like Argleton. If that same fake feature appears on a competitor's map, it is undeniable proof of theft. Argleton was almost certainly one of these digital decoys, a trapdoor from a licensed dataset that slipped through Google's filters and into the public view. It was a place that shouldn't exist, created to protect the very data that defines what does. This phenomenon is not confined to the English countryside. In Argentina, users discovered a street in Buenos Aires labeled Beetle Street, complete with intersections named after John, Paul, George, and Ringo. It was a charming tribute, but it was not real. Investigations traced it back to a well-meaning but misguided edit by a user in Google's MapMaker program, a since-retired tool that allowed the public to contribute corrections. Someone had decided the world needed a Fab 4 crossroads, and for a time the algorithm believed them. Elsewhere, glitches create surreal geographies. In 2010, a software bug caused the border between Nicaragua and Costa Rica to shift on Google Maps, inadvertently placing a disputed island firmly in Nicaraguan territory. This digital error had real-world consequences, contributing to a tense military standoff between the two nations. The map, in that moment, didn't just reflect reality, it attempted to reshape it. These cases reveal the fragile, human layer beneath our digital cartography. Every map, from the Babylonian clay tablet to the global satellite network, is a story we tell about the world, compiled by people, interpreted by algorithms, and trusted by users. The phantoms of Argleton and Beetle Street are the modern equivalents of the flyaway islands on old Portolan charts, born not from mirages at sea, but from errors in code, competitive secrecy, or simple human whimsy. They persist because our trust in the glowing screen is so absolute that we rarely question its truth. We assume the algorithm is objective, but it is only as reliable as the imperfect and sometimes mischievous data we feed it. So where does this leave our journey through 30 maps? We began with parchment mysteries suggesting lost civilizations and ended with glitches in the cloud. The thread connecting a 600-year-old gazelle skin to a smartphone's pixelated era is the enduring, fallible human hand. We are the cartographers. We are the ones who choose what to include, what to omit, and what stories to tell with lines on a surface, whether it is vellum or a server farm. The places that shouldn't exist are not just errors, they are footprints. They mark the limits of our knowledge, the contours of our beliefs, and the boundless creativity of our mistakes. They remind us that a map is never the territory. It is a conversation, an argument, a dream, and sometimes a prank. It is our eternal attempt to take a vast, bewildering world and draw a box around it to say, here is where we are. And in that noble, impossible task, we will always leave room for the phantom, the echo, and the place that waits just beyond the edge of the page, inviting us to look again. From the parchment of Piri Reis to the pixels of Google Earth, we have journeyed across 30 maps that defy easy explanation. Each one, in its own way, stands as a testament to the limits of our knowledge and the audacity of the human spirit to fill the blank spaces. Some whisper of civilizations lost to the sea, their knowledge preserved only as a faded coastline on a stolen chart. Others are monuments to brilliant speculation, where a logical mind in a quiet room could almost picture a continent no one had seen. And yes, some are likely clever forgeries or the stubborn ghosts of simple human error, mirages given permanent form by the cartographer's pen. Yet, regardless of their origin, their power is undeniable. They are cracks in the foundation of our historical narrative. They force us to confront an uncomfortable truth that our understanding of the world is not a steady march from ignorance to enlightenment, but a story constantly being rewritten. The most confident map of one era becomes the curious artifact of the next, its certainties dissolving into mysteries. This is the core lesson these 30 anomalies teach us. The map is never the territory. It is always an interpretation, a story we tell ourselves about the shape of things, shaped by the technology, the beliefs, and the blind spots of its time. So where does this leave us with a question that is perhaps more important than any single answer? When you look at these lines on parchment or screen, what do you see? Are they smoking guns, tangible evidence that our timeline is missing entire epochs, that advanced cultures surveyed our planet in a forgotten age? Or are they simply fascinating historical curiosities, beautiful examples of how error, ambition, and genius are woven together in our quest to comprehend our world? The evidence is laid out before you, a gallery of the impossible. The interpretation now is yours. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey to the edges of the known world, be sure to subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries.